Kalz'nor's three eyes narrowed as he stood before the display, the glow of the laser plasma illuminating his chiseled features. The arena was about to open before him, and his mind already drifted to the victory he was about to claim. The chamber vibrated lightly under his feet, the ambient pulse of Nexus Prime flowing through the walls. A familiar sensation, the soft hum of power, of inevitability. This would be another triumph, another memory for the histories. "You've fought 3 humans before, Grandmaster," his advisor Nexos said, his tone laced with quiet reverence. "Perhaps this one will surprise you?" Kalz'nor allowed himself a brief chuckle, the sound rich and full, resonating against the smooth, crystalline walls. "Surprise me?" His deep voice echoed in the sterile chamber. "I doubt it. The last 3 were predictable. They were, what? Amusing, for a few moments." He paused, lifting one of his gloved hands to trace the edge of his ceremonial blade, Starfire Saber. The weapon shimmered, its core pulsing with the captured essence of a dying star. They barely lasted a minute. Nexos remained silent, but Kalz'nor could sense his presence, the tension, the anticipation of a fight. They had seen these humans. Primitive, chaotic, emotional. Their challenge was as inevitable as their defeat. "Display the challenger's statistics," Kalz'nor commanded, his voice cutting through the silence. A flicker of light, and the heads-up display flashed to life before him. The image of Jack Aldridge, the human challenger, appeared in sharp relief against the swirling data. Kalz'nor's mandibles tightened as he examined the human's profile. Height, weight, age, training. All trivial details. The image of a species still trapped in the infancy of their potential. "Jack Aldridge," Kalz'nor muttered, his tongue curling around the unfamiliar name, testing its weight. "A human, not even genetically modified. I doubt he even understands the nuances of a proper blade." He scoffed, stepping back from the display, the cool air of the chamber biting at his exposed skin. "I will show him what it means to face a true master." The meditation crystals that lined his chamber began to pulse softly in response to his rising energy. The subtle vibrations matched his heartbeat, syncing with the calm rhythm he had cultivated over the centuries. 30 centuries undefeated. This moment was nothing but a formality. He didn't even need to look at the display again. There was no way a human could best him. "Shall we prepare for your entrance, Grandmaster?" Nexos's voice broke the silence, bringing Kalz'nor's mind back to the present. Kalz'nor turned, his expression unreadable, and nodded. "Yes. Let them see me. Let them witness the inevitable." He lifted his chin with a quiet authority. "This human's death will be just another story for the histories, another page in my legacy." He adjusted his ceremonial armor, a brilliant, shifting metal, alive with energy, sculpted to adapt to his every movement. The layers of protection, crafted from the densest alloys, shifted seamlessly with each motion. Unlike the primitive armor humans used, which served only as crude protection, his was an extension of his body. It adapted with him, moved with him, and most importantly, it never hindered his combat. Every piece of it felt like an extension of his own body, perfectly tuned, precisely responsive. "Let them laugh," Kalz'nor muttered as he turned toward the great doors that led into the arena. "The humans will laugh, but when they see the power of a true master, their laughter will die in their throats." The corridors of Nexus Prime pulsed around him as he walked toward the arena. The walls seemed alive with energy, almost as if they were responding to his growing anticipation. As the doors to the arena began to part, Kalz'nor's 3 eyes locked onto the vast expanse beyond. The celestial arena lay ahead, its central platform floating effortlessly between twin artificial stars. The air shimmered with the energy of the place, its surreal glow painting everything with a soft light. 1,000 species had gathered to witness this moment. From every corner of the galaxy, they had come to see Kalz'nor in action, and this human, this unworthy challenger, would give them no more than a few moments of entertainment. The crowd's roar was deafening, and the tremor of their excitement vibrated through Kalz'nor's very bones. The vast stadium of the arena seemed to pulse with the excitement, the stands rising higher with each level, filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. The walls of the arena were made of luminium, a rare material known for its crystalline properties, and every movement within it would create an echo, reverberating across the dome of the space, bringing everything into alignment. "Grandmaster," Nexos called, his voice carrying through the comms as Kalz'nor approached the central platform. "The crowd is particularly large today. The human challenger's presence has sparked great curiosity. We have also confirmed that he has requested a very unconventional weapon." Kalz'nor's gaze hardened. "Unconventional? He brings a knife to a war, I presume." His voice was thick with disdain. "No, Grandmaster. A simple sword, a metal blade forged from the human's home world. No enhancements, no power fields," Nexos explained. Kalz'nor paused in his stride, disbelief creeping into his features. "A sword? Not even a plasma blade?" The absurdity of the request rippled through him, and a harsh laugh escaped his lips, ringing out through the corridor. Let him bring his toys. It will make the victory all the more amusing. The door to the arena opened before him, the sudden silence in the air amplifying the anticipation that crackled in his body. Stepping onto the arena floor, he was greeted by the full force of the spectators' cheers, the sound swelling into a deafening crescendo. His eyes locked onto the far side of the arena, where his opponent was expected to emerge. He could see nothing yet, only the blinding light of the twin artificial stars shining down upon the platform. "Ah, the crowd is excited," Kalz'nor muttered to himself, adjusting the grip on his Starfire Saber. "I'll give them what they want, but they'll see soon enough that their excitement is misplaced. Another short-lived spectacle." As he awaited the human's arrival, Kalz'nor allowed himself a moment of reflection, his sharp mind analyzing every possibility. This human, Jack Aldridge, would be just like the others, unrefined, unprepared, and ultimately outclassed. No advanced techniques, no enhancements to boost his natural abilities. No matter how strong a human was, it was clear there was no match for Kalz'nor's mastery. But then, a shift, a slight disturbance in the atmosphere. The human entered the arena, and Kalz'nor's expectations shattered. Jack Aldridge, dressed in simple black training garments, stepped into the arena with an air of confident ease that seemed at odds with the spectacle he was about to face. No glowing plasma armor, no enhancements to boost his reflexes, nothing but his body, his steel sword, and that unsettling smile. Kalz'nor's eyes narrowed, not in disdain, but in something far more dangerous: curiosity. "Jack Aldridge," Kalz'nor spoke, his voice carrying across the arena, cutting through the crowd's murmurs. "Let us see if you can prove your worth." The human's smile only widened. Jack Aldridge's boots made no sound against the floor of the arena as he stepped onto the platform, his figure illuminated by the harsh, cold light of the twin artificial suns above. He moved with an almost deliberate calmness, the heavy weight of the alien crowd's collective gaze pressing down on him. The roar that greeted him was almost a mockery, a chorus of laughter that echoed through the hollow space like a gust of wind across a barren desert. The grand entrance was supposed to be his moment of fear, of awe. Instead, the human didn't flinch. Kalz'nor, standing tall at the center of the arena, narrowed his eyes as the human approached. The sight of him, unadorned, unenhanced, and seemingly unremarkable, shifted something deep within him. The human had no ceremonial armor, no artificial body enhancements, not even a modicum of cybernetic reinforcement that was common among his kind. He was entirely out of place in the midst of such technological grandeur. Kalz'nor's grip tightened around the hilt of the Starfire Saber, the weight of the weapon familiar and comforting in his hands. But this human, Jack Aldridge, had done something that no challenger before him had done. He had walked into the arena without fear. The sound of his boots against the crystalline surface of the platform echoed in Kalz'nor's ears, cutting through the laughter of the crowd. Jack was not cowering. He wasn't even trying to impress anyone. His posture was relaxed, almost lazy, as if he were strolling through the park, rather than facing a duel against the most fearsome being across 17 galaxies. The alien crowd began to quiet, confusion rippling through their collective consciousness. They had expected something more from the human, a display of fear, or at the very least a semblance of awe in the face of such a challenge. Instead, all they saw was a man, unassuming and calm, his black training garments moving with the slightest shift of his body. The human's movements were fluid, confident, his steps quiet but steady, like a predator silently closing the distance. Kalz'nor's mandibles twitched, sensing something off, though he could not place what it was. The human was no longer the source of amusement. He was beginning to feel like an anomaly, one that would soon be squashed under his blade. But for a moment Kalz'nor hesitated, something the grandmaster had not experienced in centuries. The arena's heads-up display blinked to life before Kalz'nor, the data on Jack Aldridge flashing before his 3 eyes. The odds of the human's survival were laughable, 1,000 to 1. Those odds hadn't even caused a ripple in Kalz'nor's confidence. But the human didn't flinch. He did not even seem to notice the ridiculousness of it all. Instead, Jack's face, calm and unreadable, scanned the arena as if to make sure he understood the magnitude of what was at stake. "Grandmaster Kalz'nor," Jack's voice rang out, clear and firm, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "I see you've made your name across many galaxies." There was no fear, no tremor in his voice, only the quiet assurance of someone who had accepted his place in the universe. "I hope I can live up to your reputation." Kalz'nor's third eye flared in momentary annoyance. "I hope you have made peace with your deities, human," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. He shifted his stance, letting the weight of his words sink into the human before him. "You will need more than just faith to survive what is coming." Jack's lips quirked upward, but there was no hint of fear in his smile. "I'm not here for survival," he said, a playful glint flickering in his dark eyes. "I'm here for the fight." A subtle change washed over Kalz'nor, like the first crack of ice before a storm. Jack Aldridge wasn't intimidated. In fact, it was almost as if he was enjoying this. A wave of irritation threatened to break through Kalz'nor's calm. This human, this underdog, was not behaving like any adversary he had faced before, and that unnerved him. The arena's display shifted, signaling the beginning of the weapon selection ritual. The swirling crystalline orb hovered before them, displaying the finest weapons from across the galaxies. Kalz'nor's eyes locked onto the familiar glowing Starfire Saber, still sheathed and awaiting his command. His fingers flexed, feeling the pulse of energy in the blade. It was a perfect extension of his power, a weapon unlike any other in known space. "Let the ritual commence," Kalz'nor said, his voice low, challenging. As per tradition, he stepped forward, his movements fluid and practiced. The audience's attention was fixed on him. The anticipation thick in the air as he approached the weapon display. His eyes swept over the many choices, blades of plasma, gravity-based weapons, and energy-infused swords. All of them could cut through anything, reduce entire fleets to ash. Kalz'nor chose the Starfire Saber. As he drew the blade from its stasis field, the arena seemed to hum with energy. The blade's edge flickered with a light that could melt planets, and its mere presence radiated power. The crowd fell into a collective silence, recognizing the weapon's importance and the guarantee of a swift and inevitable victory. "Choose wisely, human," Kalz'nor mocked, turning toward Jack. "You are but a child, playing with tools you cannot comprehend." But when Jack Aldridge stepped forward to choose his weapon, the entire arena fell into stunned silence. He reached into the arsenal sphere, his hand casually selecting an object that stood in stark contrast to Kalz'nor's glowing celestial blade. The human's fingers curled around a simple, unadorned metal sword. Its surface was dull, with no enhancement or energy signature to speak of, just steel. The crowd, puzzled and confused, erupted into disbelief. Gasps and laughter filled the arena, but Jack did not waver. Kalz'nor could not hide his amusement. A human with a metal sword? The absurdity of it took a moment to settle in, and then it hit him, a wave of derision and anger. "Do you honestly think you can challenge me with that, toy?" Kalz'nor sneered, his three eyes narrowing. "A blade from your homeworld? How quaint!" Jack's expression remained unchanged, his confidence unshaken. "It's not about the blade, Grandmaster," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's about how you use it." The arena AI's mechanical voice echoed through the space, confirming the weapon's selection. The challenger, Jack Aldridge of Earth, has chosen a Grade 0 weapon, traditional steel. The arena recognizes this selection, and it is valid under ancient laws. The laughter from the alien crowd intensified, but there was something else, a shift, subtle but palpable. Jack's audacity was starting to stir something deeper in them, something beyond mere ridicule. Kalz'nor, however, couldn't shake the growing unease. He glanced again at the human, noticing something in his stance that had not been there before, a quiet intensity, an unwavering focus that suggested Jack was not merely here to be defeated. Kalz'nor gripped his Starfire Saber tightly, feeling the weight of the situation shift. The universe had never seen an opponent quite like this human. No enhancements, no advanced weapons, just a human with a blade, ready to face an alien champion. As the arena's bell rang, Kalz'nor locked eyes with Jack Aldridge once more. He had underestimated this human, and the taste of that mistake lingered in his throat. "Prepare yourself, human," Kalz'nor growled, stepping into his battle stance. "The end comes swiftly for those who are foolish enough to face me." Jack Aldridge, still smiling, simply nodded. "Let's see who's foolish, shall we?" The bell rang, its sound resonating through the arena like a thunderclap, shaking the walls with its clarity. The floor beneath Kalz'nor's boots vibrated as he exhaled deeply, his three eyes narrowing in focused intensity. The human stood before him, the simplicity of his stance unnerving. No hesitation, no fear. Jack Aldridge, the challenger from Earth, was more than just a curiosity. The crowd's laughter had died down, replaced by an expectant, breathless silence. They were waiting for something. An explosion, perhaps. The clash of advanced weaponry against raw, primitive force. Kalz'nor surged forward with a fluid grace, the Starfire Saber slicing the air in front of him with a whispering hum. His movements were fast, controlled, and relentless, as always. A flick of his wrist, and the blade ignited, its edge crackling with the energy of a dying sun. His attack was a calculated strike aimed at Jack's center, a move designed to end the match in seconds. The human had no armor, no enhanced reflexes, just a simple blade. He would be nothing more than an obstacle in Kalz'nor's path. But Jack wasn't where Kalz'nor expected him to be. In a flash, Jack shifted, his body bending and twisting with an elegance that seemed impossible for a human. Kalz'nor's blade swept through empty air as Jack's foot tapped the ground, the soft scrape of his sole against the platform the only indication of his movement. He was already a step ahead. Kalz'nor's mind raced. This human wasn't acting like an underdog. He was moving like a seasoned warrior. Jack's sword arced through the air with a simple, fluid motion. Kalz'nor barely had time to react as the blade met his own with a sharp, discordant ring. Steel clashed against energy, the sound reverberating in the arena, sending a ripple of shock through the audience. Kalz'nor pulled back, his hand still holding the Starfire Saber, feeling the familiar pulse of the weapon's power. The moment should have been a victory, but instead something flickered in Kalz'nor's mind. Something was wrong. Jack stood there, the steel sword held loosely in his hand, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Not bad for a start," he said, his voice as calm as ever. The crowd was silent, but Kalz'nor could feel their gaze shift from amusement to something else, curiosity. Kalz'nor's mandibles twitched in irritation. "You think you've won, human?" he snarled, his voice low and cold. His hand tightened around the hilt of the Starfire Saber, the familiar weight grounding him. His next strike would break the human in half, or so he thought. He moved again, faster this time, the saber flashing as it cut through the air with terrifying speed. Jack didn't flinch. Instead, his body shifted again, a graceful step that seemed more like a dance than a dodge. Kalz'nor's blade passed through the space where Jack had stood, its energy singing through the air, but there was no target. No need to be hasty, Jack said softly, his feet barely touching the ground as he flowed around Kalz'nor's strike. His movements were smooth, effortless, like a stream of water slipping between the cracks of rock. Every step he took seemed to have a purpose, every gesture calculated. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a quiet, steady resolve. Kalz'nor felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in his chest. Frustration. This human, this fragile creature, was not reacting the way every other challenger had. Kalz'nor had faced warriors who used technology to enhance their abilities, but they were all predictable. They relied on their enhancements, their weapons, their tactics. This human, Jack Aldridge, relied only on his body and his mind, and so far, that seemed to be more than enough. The grandmaster launched another strike, this time using his advanced combat technique, a sequence of multidimensional slashes that would overwhelm any opponent. The saber glowed brighter, its arc cutting through space in a deadly dance. Jack wasn't where Kalz'nor expected him to be again. He was already moving, his body flowing like water as he sidestepped and ducked, each motion looking almost casual. Jack didn't rely on speed or strength. He moved with the rhythm of the fight, predicting Kalz'nor's every attack as if he had already seen it play out 1,000 times. Kalz'nor's pulse quickened, a tingling sensation running down his spine. This was no longer about a simple duel. This human, this earthling, was forcing Kalz'nor to rethink everything he knew about combat. He was used to being the one who controlled the flow of the fight. But Jack was not reacting. He was leading. The human struck then, his sword slicing the air with deadly intent. The simplicity of the move should have been laughable. Kalz'nor had seen far more complicated attacks from lesser opponents, but it wasn't. The steel blade, its surface gleaming dully under the artificial suns, seemed to pierce through the very space Kalz'nor's energy blade had been guarding. Jack's strike was so perfectly timed that Kalz'nor barely registered it before the tip of the sword grazed his side. Kalz'nor froze. His armor's quantum field, usually flawless in its defense, had allowed the blade to slip through. The grandmaster's hand tightened on the hilt of his saber as he stepped back, surveying the faint cut that had appeared along his combat arm. The blood that seeped out was violet, a reminder of his species' advanced biology. He had been cut by a human. The audience was silent now, the weight of the moment sinking in. Kalz'nor's 3 eyes narrowed, assessing the situation. He had never been wounded by a mere human. Never. His pride, his reputation, was at stake. And yet this earthling had managed to land a blow, a small one, but a blow nonetheless. Jack stood there, his sword still held loosely in his hand. His expression was unchanged, calm. "I didn't expect it to be this easy," he said, his tone almost mocking. "But you're holding back, aren't you? 300 years undefeated, and this is the best you've got?" Kalz'nor's rage surged. "You speak too much," he growled, and with a single motion he lunged forward again, the Starfire Saber crackling with energy. This time, he wouldn't hold back. This time, he would end it. But Jack was already moving. His body shifted again, the simple steel sword meeting the energy blade with a resounding clash that sent a shockwave through the arena. Kalz'nor's strike faltered for a moment, his blade vibrating in his grip. It was impossible. Jack's steel sword, a mere human tool, had held against his Starfire Saber. Kalz'nor hesitated, just for a moment. But that moment was enough. Jack's eyes locked onto his, a glint of something almost predatory behind his calm expression. "You're not used to this, are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady, his smile never fading. "You've relied too long on your technology, Grandmaster, and that's your weakness." Kalz'nor's thoughts raced, but his body reacted faster. He launched into a brutal flurry of strikes, each one faster and more powerful than the last. The Starfire Saber moved like a comet through the air, an unstoppable force. But Jack, that human, wasn't there to be struck. Each movement, each dodge, was a step toward the inevitable. The Grandmaster's eyes narrowed. He knew now, this fight was far from over, and the human was not going to make it easy. As the battle raged on, a question burned in Kalz'nor's mind. What was Jack Aldridge's secret? How had a simple human defeated the most advanced defenses in the galaxy? Kalz'nor's movements grew more erratic, his strikes more desperate. He had never fought like this before. His mind was caught in a whirlwind of frustration, unable to predict the next move of his opponent. Jack, however, remained the same, calm, collected, and relentless in his pursuit of victory. The arena trembled beneath Kalz'nor's feet as the Starfire Saber swung in a wild arc. His combat instincts flared, his body moving before his mind could even fully register the situation. The human, Jack Aldridge, was still there, still dodging, his blade meeting Kalz'nor's energy blade with shocking regularity. Each strike, each block, sent reverberations through Kalz'nor's limbs, sending jolts of frustration surging into his chest. Kalz'nor's eyes flicked to the crowd as he launched into another flurry of attacks, his blade a blur of glowing light in the dim atmosphere of the arena. Their silence was deafening. The awe in their eyes was clear. No one had ever seen a human move like this. Kalz'nor could feel it in the way their gaze intensified with every swing. It wasn't just curiosity, it was respect. His next strike was meant to finish the fight. A single devastating slash aimed at the human's midsection, a move that had ended hundreds of battles before it even began. But once again, Jack wasn't there. The strike passed through the air where he had been, the blade trailing a path of crackling energy that burned the atmosphere. Kalz'nor's jaw clenched, his mandibles tightening in a snarl of frustration. He had never felt so off balance, so vulnerable. The Starfire Saber had never failed him, but this human, Jack Aldridge, was something else entirely. His movements were too fluid, too deliberate. Every time Kalz'nor thought he had him cornered, Jack was already slipping away, weaving through his attacks like smoke through a sieve. Jack's voice broke through the silence, calm and steady, like a storm that had yet to reach its full fury. "You know, Grandmaster," he said, his tone maddeningly calm, "your attacks are predictable." Kalz'nor's grip tightened around the hilt of the saber as he prepared to launch yet another blow. "Predictable," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You are not even capable of comprehending the true meaning of strategy." Jack didn't respond with words, but with action. His sword moved again, slicing the air with a soft hiss. Kalz'nor parried the attack, but the force of it pushed him back a step. His heart began to race in a way it had never done before. This human, this earthling, was forcing him to fight for every inch. A surge of energy shot through Kalz'nor as he stepped back, trying to regain his composure. His gaze locked onto Jack's face, and for the first time in his career, Kalz'nor was unsure of his victory. The human's eyes were focused, unwavering, as if he had already won. Kalz'nor could feel it, the shift. Jack had found his rhythm, and now it was Kalz'nor who was playing catch-up. The Starfire Saber pulsed with a renewed intensity, its energy resonating through the arena. Kalz'nor's mind clicked into overdrive, processing the situation with precision. His next strike needed to be more than just brute force. He needed to outthink the human. He needed to use everything at his disposal. "You're right, human," Kalz'nor hissed, his voice dripping with a strange, quiet respect. "You're good, but I am better." With that, he unleashed the full force of his power, the saber blazing as it cut through the air in a series of fast, unpredictable angles. Jack's eyes never wavered. He was there, in the thick of it, his body moving like liquid, slipping through the chaotic storm of Kalz'nor's attacks with uncanny grace. Then, it happened. Jack moved in, slowly at first, deliberately. Kalz'nor's third eye flickered in confusion. The human was too close. There was no time to adjust, no time to react. Jack's blade flicked upward in a sharp, sudden movement, not aiming for the center, but for the edges of Kalz'nor's defenses, those areas where even the advanced armor was weaker. Kalz'nor barely had time to raise his blade to block before Jack's sword collided with his arm, scraping against the surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Kalz'nor didn't feel pain, not yet. But then, the hum of his energy field stuttered. His armor had absorbed the blow, but only just. The quantum field had shifted in response, and something wasn't right. Something was off. Jack, however, didn't stop. His sword flashed once again, this time aimed at Kalz'nor's side, where a gap in his armor existed. The Grandmaster's eyes widened in realization. The human had already mapped his weaknesses. He was waiting for these precise moments to strike, waiting for the openings Kalz'nor didn't even know existed. The crowd, once expectant, now whispered among themselves, their murmurs growing louder with each passing second. Kalz'nor's fury simmered. He wasn't just being outmatched physically, his mind was failing him. The human wasn't relying on technology, wasn't using enhanced reflexes. He was relying on something much simpler, something Kalz'nor had forgotten over the centuries, pure skill. A sharp pain suddenly flared in Kalz'nor's secondary arm. Jack's blade had cut through again, this time leaving a faint line of violet blood trickling down his arm. Kalz'nor's head snapped to look at the wound. It was nothing, but it was something. "I thought you were supposed to be invincible," Jack said, his voice steady, almost mocking. "Seems like your reputation is the only thing that's been holding you together." Kalz'nor's jaw clenched. He stepped back, his mind racing. Jack had found his rhythm, and now Kalz'nor was the one reacting. But this wasn't over. Kalz'nor's grip on his saber tightened. There was still the element of surprise, the unpredictability of his next move. He could overwhelm the human with pure force. "Don't get too comfortable, Earthling," Kalz'nor spat, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "This ends now." With that, Kalz'nor shifted his stance. His next strike would not just be a blow, it would be a statement. He would not let this human, this imperfect creature, defeat him. Jack, for his part, didn't even flinch. Instead, he shifted slightly, his steel sword at the ready. His movements, though casual, were poised, like a panther waiting to strike. His smile never faltered. "Come on, Grandmaster," he said, his voice carrying through the tense silence of the arena. "Let's see if you really are the master you claim to be." Kalz'nor's heart thundered in his chest as he rushed forward. The air around him seemed to crackle with the energy of his strike. This would be it, the final clash. Only one would walk out of this arena alive. But as the distance between them closed, a thought flickered in Kalz'nor's mind. What if, just what if? He had underestimated this human, not just in strength, but in something far more dangerous. As his blade met Jack's once again, Kalz'nor couldn't help but wonder what the final lesson of this battle would be. Kalz'nor's chest heaved as he stepped back, his eyes never leaving Jack. The human's sword was a constant presence in his peripheral vision, a weight he couldn't ignore. Each swing, each parry, had forced him to rethink his approach. The crowd's energy was palpable now. Their collective breath held as the duel stretched on. An impossible contest between a grandmaster who had never been bested and an earthling armed only with simple steel. The air crackled with tension, like the first hints of a storm building on the horizon. Kalz'nor's mandibles twitched in frustration, his enhanced senses telling him things his eyes couldn't yet confirm. His movements were becoming erratic, faster, more brutal. But Jack was still there, dodging, countering, never once faltering. There was no hesitation in his body, no uncertainty in his strikes. It was as if he had known the outcome before the fight had even begun. Kalz'nor's mind raced. He was not losing to this human. The Starfire Saber was not merely a weapon, it was an extension of his will, a symbol of his dominance across galaxies. And yet here he was, trapped in a battle he had never expected. This earthling was something else entirely. Another strike came at him, this one aimed for his chest, and Kalz'nor barely managed to raise his blade in time. The impact sent a shockwave through his arms, rattling his bones. The force of the blow was enough to send a jolt of realization through his mind. This human sword wasn't just sharp. It was calculated. Each strike was not only an attack, but a study, a slow, methodical dissection of his every defense. The crowd was silent now, their shock at Jack's performance growing. Kalz'nor could feel their disbelief, their awe. It was suffocating. He had fought in arenas filled with the greatest warriors, faced battles against entire species. But this was something new, something unpredictable. Jack's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unrelenting. "You can't rely on your technology forever, Kalz'nor," he said, his voice steady, not even winded. "I'm not fighting with gadgets. I'm fighting with skill." Skill. The word rang in Kalz'nor's mind like a warning bell. What if the human was right? What if he had been so obsessed with his advanced technology that he had forgotten the one thing that had truly made him the champion he was? He had always relied on the blade, on the quantum mechanics that made him a near-impervious force on the battlefield. But Jack was fighting with something simpler, something purer, a fundamental understanding of his own body and the weapon in his hands. It was almost elemental. Kalz'nor's hand tightened on the hilt of the Starfire Saber. Number. He couldn't afford to let doubt creep in. He had trained for centuries. His species had perfected the art of combat for millennia. He would not lose to a human. He lunged forward again, but this time there was a difference. His strike was fast, yes, but it wasn't controlled. There was an urgency in his movements now, a desperation he hadn't felt before. Jack didn't even flinch. He stepped aside, his blade catching Kalz'nor's with a soft metallic ring. Jack's sword didn't break. It didn't falter. It simply kept meeting Kalz'nor's Starfire Saber with a rhythm so fluid that the grandmaster was starting to question his own technique. "You're still trying to predict my moves, aren't you?" Jack's voice was cool, almost amused as he sidestepped another of Kalz'nor's attacks. "I thought by now you'd have figured out. There's no predicting something that's not bound by the rules you're playing by." Kalz'nor's chest tightened. The Starfire Saber was a weapon of unmatched destruction. Yet here it was, unable to land a blow on the human. How was that possible? He pulled back, trying to regain control. The audience's expectant silence was deafening, pressing in on him from all sides. Kalz'nor's thoughts raced, his mind searching for an answer. Jack's attacks weren't complicated. They weren't reliant on technology. He was moving with a simplicity that Kalz'nor had long since discarded, relying on instinct, on intuition. "You're not fighting me, Kalz'nor," Jack continued, his smile never fading. "You're fighting yourself." The Grandmaster's eyes narrowed. He stepped back, raising the Starfire Saber to his side, gathering his strength. He could not allow this human to continue taunting him, to continue pressing into his weaknesses. He had been trained to overcome any opponent. He was Kalz'nor, the undefeated champion, and champions did not lose. But what if Jack was right? What if, in all his centuries of victories, Kalz'nor had forgotten something fundamental? Before he could answer his own question, Jack attacked again, his sword moving with astonishing speed. The simple steel blade was a blur as it moved toward Kalz'nor's side. Kalz'nor raised his saber to parry, but the human was already moving again, shifting his weight, changing his angle mid-strike. The steel met the energy blade with a sharp, echoing clang, sending a wave of shock through Kalz'nor's entire body. For a moment, Kalz'nor froze. The contact should have been impossible. The human's blade should have shattered on impact, but instead it held strong, the two swords locked in a moment of pure tension. Kalz'nor's mind screamed for him to respond, to fight back. But Jack's eyes held his gaze, steady and unrelenting. For the first time in his life, Kalz'nor felt vulnerable. "I can't predict what you'll do next," Jack said softly, his eyes never leaving Kalz'nor's. "That's the problem." Kalz'nor's mind snapped back into focus. He was failing. The universe had always been a game of prediction for him. Predict the enemy's next move, predict the battle's outcome. But Jack Aldridge was not a piece in the game. He was the game itself. And for once, Kalz'nor didn't know how to play. The silence in the arena was unbearable. Kalz'nor's mind raced, every fiber of his being urging him to end this fight, to reclaim his dominance. But every time he swung, every time he tried to land a blow, the human was already there, waiting for him. He was moving without calculation, without technology. He was simply moving. Jack's blade flicked once more, this time toward Kalz'nor's unprotected side. The Grandmaster had no time to react, only instinct. His breath caught as the cold steel of the blade grazed his skin. It wasn't a fatal blow, just a scrape, a reminder. Kalz'nor's blood spilled onto the arena floor, a stark contrast to the bright light of the artificial suns. Kalz'nor staggered back, his hand pressed against the cut. He had been outclassed by a human. For the first time in centuries, he found himself questioning everything he had built, every victory he had claimed. Jack wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to show Kalz'nor something that had eluded him. Kalz'nor's heart pounded as he looked at the human before him. What had he missed? What had he forgotten? The answer was clear now, and it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jack Aldridge wasn't fighting to prove something to Kalz'nor. He was fighting to prove something to himself. And Kalz'nor had just become the pawn in that game. "You're right," Kalz'nor said quietly, the weight of his own realization crushing him. "This ends now." Jack raised his sword once again, his smile never wavering. "I think it's just beginning." The Starfire Saber was still in Kalz'nor's hand, its energy crackling with volatile intensity. But the grandmaster's grip had loosened. His heart thundered, not in battle-fueled excitement, but in a sickening realization. The human, Jack Aldridge, was not a foe to be underestimated. Jack had broken the rules of the game, and in doing so, had shattered the very foundation Kalz'nor had built his legacy upon. Kalz'nor stepped back, wiping the blood from his side with his free hand, his eyes locked on Jack's unyielding stance. The energy of the crowd was electric, pulsing through the arena like a tide. The laughter from earlier had died out, replaced by an anxious hum of anticipation. The spectators were witnessing something that had never happened before. Kalz'nor was losing. Not just the fight, but his confidence, his sense of self. The human was silent, still as a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Jack's smile had faded, replaced by a focused intensity that burned through the space between them. Kalz'nor's anger flared again, but it was different this time. The edges of it felt hollow, as though the fury was no longer enough to guide him. Jack wasn't just beating him physically. He was outmaneuvering his mind, exploiting every flaw Kalz'nor had failed to see. "You know," Jack began, his voice cutting through the tension with surprising clarity, "you never once thought I'd land a hit, did you? You were so sure of your weapons, your technology, your ancient tricks." His sword, still resting by his side, gleamed dully in the artificial light, its simplicity belying its lethal nature. "But you missed something." Kalz'nor's breath came faster now, his eyes narrowing as his mind raced. He could feel the weight of the crowd's gaze, the pressure building within him. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to take control, to win this fight. But Jack's words were more than just taunts. They were a challenge to everything Kalz'nor had ever believed. What had Jack seen that Kalz'nor had missed? "I was never about the weapon," Jack continued, taking a step forward, his eyes never leaving Kalz'nor's. "You think you're invincible because of your toys. But a sword is just a tool. It's the hands that use it that matter." Kalz'nor's gaze flickered to the Starfire Saber in his hands, its molten edge still alight with fury. His hands, his mind, had relied on technology for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to fight simply for the art of it. Jack wasn't here to impress with flashy moves or futuristic weaponry. He was here to prove something deeper, a lesson Kalz'nor had long forgotten. With a growl, Kalz'nor swung the saber again, this time with reckless abandon. The energy blade arced through the air, but Jack wasn't there. Once again, Kalz'nor's strike passed through empty space. He could hear the gasps from the audience as Jack effortlessly sidestepped, his movements fluid like a dancer weaving between the shadows. "You're predictable," Jack said quietly, his voice echoing in the stillness of the arena. "I can feel every move you're going to make before you even decide it." Kalz'nor felt a surge of anger rise in him, his body tensing. He couldn't lose. Not like this. But as he took a step forward, Jack was already there, moving with uncanny precision, closing the distance between them in a way Kalz'nor couldn't predict. His blade, simple, steel, met Kalz'nor's energy sword with an impact that made the grandmaster stumble back. "How?" Kalz'nor growled, his mind struggling to process the impossible. "How can you fight like this?" Jack's eyes flickered with something almost human. a quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes more than any words could. "You're not fighting me, Kalz'nor," Jack said, lowering his sword slightly. "You're fighting yourself. The rules you've built your whole life on, they don't work here." Kalz'nor's breathing grew shallow, his pulse racing. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. His saber trembled in his grip, no longer the force of destruction he had always believed it to be. He was failing. The human was right. He had relied on technology, on the mechanics of the fight, and had ignored the one thing that made all of it work: the simplicity, the raw instinct of combat. For a brief moment, Kalz'nor's mind cleared. He could feel his body moving, the tension of the fight, the burning energy within him, but also the weight of the lesson that was unfolding. Jack's skill wasn't a trick. It wasn't some edge he had gained through technology or force. It was the art of movement, of understanding his own body, his own rhythm. Kalz'nor had become too reliant on everything else. Jack had come here with nothing but his own will to fight. Kalz'nor's hand twitched on the hilt of his saber. The weight of his blade seemed lighter now, almost useless. He felt the crowd's anticipation like a physical pressure, each second stretching longer than the last. He wasn't just fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting to reclaim something far deeper, something he had lost long ago. "What is this?" Kalz'nor muttered to himself. "Why am I failing?" He was no longer looking at Jack as an opponent. The human was a symbol now of everything Kalz'nor had overlooked, everything he had taken for granted. In Jack, Kalz'nor saw something he had forgotten: the joy of the fight, the art of combat, pure and untainted by technology. The realization hit Kalz'nor like a physical blow. Jack's voice broke through his reverie. "You're waiting for something, for a new trick, a new move, something that will guarantee your win." He shook his head slightly, a smile playing on his lips. "There is no trick. There is only you and me, and my sword." His blade flashed again, an almost imperceptible movement that made Kalz'nor stagger back. In that moment, Kalz'nor knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to win with just power, with just energy. He had to strip it all away, return to the fundamentals of what made him a warrior. The Starfire Saber wasn't the answer. He had to fight like Jack. He dropped the saber, letting it fall to the floor with a resounding thud. The energy blade flickered and died. The arena was silent, the shock of the grandmaster's action rippling through the crowd. For a moment, Kalz'nor was uncertain of what he was doing, but as his fingers closed around the backup blade at his side, an ancient weapon forged from the depths of his people's history, he felt a surge of clarity. Jack watched him, his eyes steady, unblinking. "Now you get it," he said softly. Kalz'nor stepped forward, the ancient blade now gripped firmly in his hand. There was no glow, no crackling energy, just cold steel, honed by the hands of his ancestors. He met Jack's gaze and smiled, a new fire lighting in his chest. "Let's see if you can handle this." And in that moment, the arena was no longer an arena. It was a battlefield, a place where true warriors fought not with technology, but with heart. Kalz'nor would give everything for this moment. He would face Jack, not as the grandmaster, but as something far more dangerous. A true fighter. The shift in Kalz'nor's focus was palpable. Gone was the arrogance, the certainty of an invincible being whose entire existence had been built on overwhelming power. Standing in the arena, facing Jack, his mind had cleared. The weight of his centuries of dominance had crumbled away, revealing the truth beneath it all. The fight was not about technology. It was about the purity of combat. Kalz'nor's hand tightened around the ancient sword, its familiar weight grounding him. For the first time in centuries, the blade felt like an extension of his will, not just an instrument of destruction. Jack didn't move. He stood still, his posture casual, but there was no mistaking the intensity in his eyes. They were locked onto Kalz'nor, unblinking, as if he could see straight through him. The crowd, too, had gone silent. The air seemed to freeze around them, the tension building in the moments before their next move. Kalz'nor's breath came slower now, more controlled. The Starfire Saber was gone, discarded in favor of something more grounded. The human's earlier taunts still lingered in his mind, but they no longer angered him. Instead, they sharpened his resolve. There was no predicting this fight, no grand strategy to rely on. Kalz'nor knew now that Jack had been teaching him all along, not through swordplay but through understanding. The true weapon wasn't the blade, but the mind that wielded it. "You dropped your toy," Jack said, his voice a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Ready to play the real game?" Kalz'nor looked at him, the corners of his mouth curving upward ever so slightly. "I think it's time we play by my rules." With a sudden motion, Kalz'nor lunged forward, his blade flashing through the air. The simple steel of Jack's sword met his ancient weapon with a sharp clash, and for the first time in this entire battle, Kalz'nor felt the resistance of another master at arms. Jack didn't retreat, didn't flinch. He met each strike head-on, his movements almost impossibly fluid. But there was a rhythm to them now. It was a rhythm Kalz'nor could recognize. It was the rhythm of a true fighter, someone who understood that no fight was ever won by brute force alone. The clang of steel against steel rang through the arena, a symphony of combat that was felt in the bones. Kalz'nor's every strike was calculated, honed over years of warfare, while Jack's responses were a beautiful counterbalance, calm, precise, efficient. There was no wasted movement in Jack's actions, no unnecessary flourishes. Each strike was deliberate, a choice rather than an instinct. Kalz'nor had thought himself the master of technique, but now he was learning that the real mastery lay in the simplicity of the approach. Their swords clashed again and again, each blow forcing Kalz'nor to reevaluate his understanding of combat. Jack's blade moved in ways that defied the logic Kalz'nor had relied on. It wasn't about physics or advanced weapons technology. It was about understanding space, timing, and opportunity, things that Kalz'nor had never considered before. "You're using the same moves you've always relied on," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper as their blades locked again. "But the thing is, you've already taught me all your tricks." Kalz'nor's muscles tensed at the words, and for the first time, doubt began to creep in. He had grown so accustomed to being one step ahead that he had forgotten what it meant to adapt. He had relied on the predictability of his own strategies, trusting in the certainty that his experience would win out. But Jack wasn't playing by those rules. Jack was fighting with the mindset of someone who had stripped away the layers of technique, someone who knew that every fight had to be different. He pulled back, trying to regain the advantage, but Jack was already there, closing the distance with a swift, calculated strike aimed at his side. Kalz'nor barely managed to deflect the blow, the steel scraping along his armor with a sound like grinding stone. The force of the attack sent a shockwave through his body, rattling him to his core. Jack had found another weakness, and this time Kalz'nor wasn't prepared for it. The grandmaster staggered, his mind racing. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead, the strain in his arms. His heart was pounding with the realization that he was no longer the one controlling the fight. Jack had already anticipated his next move, already adjusted to his rhythm. Kalz'nor had spent so long being the master that he had forgotten the one thing that made a true master, the ability to adapt, to evolve in the face of the unknown. "You're not just reacting, are you?" Kalz'nor muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on the hilt of his blade. Jack's smile was slow and knowing. "Number, I'm thinking. I've been thinking since the first time I saw you fight." Kalz'nor's head snapped up, his mind processing the words as they sank into him. Thinking. Of course, it wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about awareness, about being so in tune with the battle that you could anticipate the future. It wasn't about being faster or stronger than your opponent. It was about understanding what would happen next and choosing to move in a way that made the future irrelevant. "You've been studying me," Kalz'nor said, a hint of grudging admiration creeping into his voice. Jack nodded. "It's how we humans win. We study our opponents, not just their moves, but their minds. Once you understand the mind of the fighter, the fight is already over." Kalz'nor stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. He had never understood the battle like this before. All his victories had been won through overpowering force, through overwhelming his enemies with technology and strength. But Jack had shown him something different, something more. Kalz'nor looked at the human, and for the first time he didn't see an opponent to be crushed, but a student, someone who had learned not just how to fight, but how to think about fighting. And in that moment, Kalz'nor realized something that shook him to his very core. It wasn't about the blade. It wasn't about the moves. It was about understanding the fight, knowing how to read it. It was about using your mind to shape the outcome, not just your body. "I'm ready," Kalz'nor said quietly, meeting Jack's gaze. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Ready for what?" "To stop fighting this battle the way I've always fought," Kalz'nor replied, his voice steady now. "I'm ready to learn." For the first time, Jack's smile faded, replaced by something more like respect. He lowered his sword, taking a step back. "Then let's finish this." With that, Kalz'nor made his move, his body shifting into a new rhythm. He wasn't fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting to understand, to find the final piece of the puzzle. The blade in his hand wasn't just an instrument. It was a tool to uncover the truth. As he advanced, Jack's movements changed too. They were no longer the same calculated strikes. Now, it was a battle of equals. It wasn't about technology. It wasn't about power. It was about strategy. And the realization that the true mastery of combat came not from the weapon in your hand, but from the mind behind it. The arena was silent, a suffocating stillness that stretched between the two combatants. The echoes of their previous clashes had faded into the vast, breathless void of the space around them. Kalz'nor stood still, his sword gripped firmly in his hand. But now the weight of it felt different, less like an extension of his power and more like an instrument of understanding. Jack, opposite him, lowered his blade to the ground, the simple steel reflecting the dim light of the twin artificial stars above. The grandmaster's breathing slowed, no longer ragged with fury but steady, measured. His heart pounded, but not from anger. It was something deeper now, something more profound. He had come to a realization, a truth that had eluded him for centuries. The fight had never been about winning or losing. It had been about the journey, the understanding of what true mastery meant, and Jack Aldridge had shown him that. "You've been waiting for me to see it, haven't you?" Kalz'nor asked, his voice quieter than it had been all through the duel. Jack looked up at him, his smile soft, but there was no mockery in it now. "You had to see it for yourself." Kalz'nor nodded slowly, his mind finally catching up with the clarity Jack had forced him to confront. The battle wasn't won by the strength of the strike or the power of the weapon. It was won by the understanding of the moment, by the ability to see beyond the predictable. He had relied too long on the crutch of technology, on the assumption that his superior weapons and advancements made him invincible. But Jack had shown him something far more dangerous. A human, armed with nothing but skill, patience, and a relentless drive to learn, had become his equal. Kalz'nor's posture relaxed as the weight of his sword seemed to lessen. For the first time in the duel, he truly saw Jack, not as an opponent, but as a student, a true warrior who had mastered the art of combat in a way Kalz'nor could never have anticipated. "You're right," Kalz'nor said, his voice barely a whisper now. "You're not just fighting with a sword, Jack. You're fighting with your mind." Jack nodded, his expression still calm, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of recognition. "It's not the blade, Kalz'nor. It's the will behind it." For the first time, Kalz'nor truly understood the depth of Jack's words. It wasn't the weapon that mattered. It was the mind that wielded it, the determination that pushed it beyond the boundaries of what was expected. Humans had always been underestimated, thought of as primitive, as a species too young, too naive. But Jack had taught him that humanity's true strength lay not in technology or power, but in their ability to adapt, to learn, and to never stop striving, even in the face of impossible odds. "You've taken everything I believed in and turned it on its head," Kalz'nor said, his voice low but filled with awe. "You made me see that the fight was never about the weapons. It was always about understanding the opponent." Jack's gaze never wavered. "That's what makes you a true warrior, Kalz'nor. It's not the force you bring, but the ability to see the fight before it happens, to outthink the enemy, to move beyond what's predictable. The grandmaster stood in silence, processing the weight of those words. He had spent centuries building his reputation, conquering opponents with ease, relying on his technology to give him the advantage. But now, with Jack before him, he realized just how much he had missed in his pursuit of power. It wasn't the victories that mattered. It was the understanding of the struggle, the lessons learned in each battle. The arena, once filled with the sounds of clashing swords and the roar of the crowd, was now a quiet, sacred place. Kalz'nor had been defeated, but in that defeat, he had found something far more valuable than victory. He had found a new path forward, one where the mind, not the weapon, determined the outcome. "I yield," Kalz'nor said finally, his voice steady but filled with respect. He lowered his blade and took a step back, acknowledging Jack as the true victor. "You have shown me what true mastery is. I have been humbled." Jack stood still for a moment, the weight of Kalz'nor's admission settling in the air between them. Then, with a slow, respectful nod, Jack sheathed his sword. "It's not about being humbled, Kalz'nor. It's about growth. We all learn. We all adapt. That's what makes us human." The words hung in the air, and Kalz'nor couldn't help but feel a deep sense of understanding. The fight was over, but the lesson would stay with him forever. He had learned finally what it meant to be a true warrior. It wasn't just about strength or technology or advanced weapons. It was about pushing yourself to the limit, constantly learning, and never giving up, no matter the odds. "Thank you," Kalz'nor said, his voice thick with the emotion he had kept hidden for centuries. "Thank you for showing me the true way." Jack smiled, a smile full of quiet satisfaction. "No need to thank me, Kalz'nor. You taught yourself." The crowd, which had been silent throughout the final exchange, began to stir. The roar of applause built slowly at first, hesitant, unsure. But as the realization of what had just transpired settled in, the arena erupted into a thunderous cheer. Kalz'nor, once the undefeated grandmaster of the arena, had yielded, not out of weakness, but out of the recognition of something greater. Humanity's greatest strength had never been in its technology, its weapons, or its supposed superiority. It had always been in its ability to grow, to adapt, to learn from every failure, and continue moving forward. Kalz'nor stood tall, his head held high as he faced the crowd, but it wasn't out of pride. It was out of understanding. He had learned something vital that day, and he had learned it from a human, someone from a species he had once underestimated. The arena, the crowd, and the galaxy would remember this day, but not for the battle. They would remember it because, in the end, it was humanity that had proven its true strength. Jack Aldridge had shown them all what it meant to be human, to never stop fighting, to never stop learning, and to always rise no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. And Kalz'nor, the great grandmaster, had learned that the true power of humanity wasn't in their weapons, but in their unwavering will to continue. As Kalz'nor turned to leave the arena, he felt the weight of the moment sink in. He had faced his greatest challenge, and in doing so, he had discovered something that no technology, no weapon, no army could ever teach him. The strength of the human spirit was unmatched, and Jack Aldridge had shown him that, not with force, but with skill, humility, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew that victory wasn't always the goal. Sometimes, simply learning was the true victory. And as the roar of the crowd faded into the distance, Kalz'nor knew this. The true strength of humanity had just begun to shine, and the universe would never be the same again